Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association's Five for Breakfast. We're now in our second episode of 2026. Before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Five for Breakfast. 2026 has been a very busy and productive year so far. We've held some very productive workshops with NTIA earlier this week on permitting reform and on BEAD project completion success milestones. NTIA has now approved final proposals from 42 of the 56 states and territories so far. Louisiana is already off to the races, so things are happening. We look forward to continuing to work with NTIA to ensure we do what we can to help the program's success. In Washington, D.C. this morning at 10:15 a.m., so 15 minutes from now, the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Subcommittee on Communications and Technologies holding a hearing titled Oversight of the Federal Communications Commission. As with last month's hearing before the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, the full FCC Commission will appear to testify. At the same time, the House is also convening multiple hearings focused on artificial intelligence. The House Science, Space, Technology Committee, Research and Technology Subcommittee will hear testimony from Michael Kratos, the director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, on one of the principal authors of the administration's AI action plan on advancing that agenda. In addition, the Education and Workforce Committee will hold a hearing titled Building an AI-Ready America. Taken together, these hearings underscore Congress's broad and coordinated focus on artificial intelligence, closely aligning with our organization's emphasis on the critical relationship between AI and fiber. Congress is officially back in session, and the House and Senate are kicking off the year at a fast pace with major government funding deadlines looming at the end of the month. As a reminder, the Fiber Broadband Association will host its second annual Public Policy Summit and Fly-In in D.C. on February 24th and 25th, bringing members together with congressional leaders, administration officials, and federal agency stakeholders to focus on how we can bring high-speed, reliable connectivity to all Americans. Also, the FBA will be kicking off our regional Fiber Connect workshops in Oklahoma City on Thursday, February 5th at the Ocana Resort with a focus on tribal broadband. So you're not going to want to miss that. Last week here on Five for Breakfast, our guest was Catherine DeWitt, the director of the Pew Charitable Trust Broadband Initiative, discussed New Year, New Connections, BEAD moves forward in 2026. So Catherine's always a fan favorite, and we had a huge audience with lots of great questions that we were able to discuss during our fireside chat. So if you missed that, you can go to our website and watch the replay. Today on Five for Breakfast, our guest is Brandy Reitter, the executive director of Colorado's Broadband Office, to discuss from strategy, sustainability, Colorado's broadband approach to reliability and reach. Brandy joined the Colorado Broadband Office in 2022 and is responsible for providing oversight and management of the office program and statewide strategy for broadband deployment. She works to assist with policy and legislative development, serves on various broadband boards, and supports the work of the office. Her professional experience includes 15 years in local government management in cities and towns across the state of Colorado. As a former town manager, she built broadband programs in rural communities and has leveraged resources to deploy broadband in her communities. Her local government experience includes managing towns in Weld, Chaffee, Sasquatch, I don't even think I said that right, Brandy, and Eagle counties. She has served in roles in public utilities, economic development, and government operations in the city of Longmont, city and county of Denver, and the governments of the District of Columbia. She has a master's in public administration from the University of Colorado, Denver. In 2020, she won the City Manager of the Year for the state of Colorado by the Colorado City County Managers Association, and is appointed to several boards to several civic organizations. In her free time, which doesn't sound like you have much, Brandy, Brandy likes skiing when there's snow, camping, running, mountain dirt biking, rafting the Colorado and Arkansas rivers, and she enjoys these activities with her husband, Chris, and her dog, Tink. So welcome, Brandy, and for audience, please type in your questions as go, and we'll work those into the discussion. So welcome, Brandy. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Gary. Just hoping for snow and all the things that make Colorado special in the wintertime, but we're doing great in Colorado and moving a lot of our work forward. And I really feel like 2026 is a hit the ground running kind of year for BEAD and all of our broadband programs. So we're doing well in Colorado.
It's kind of funny. I think it was last summer or either the summer before, I can't remember now, that we had an event in June up in the Summit County, and I think we got 14 inches of snow, and so the golf tournament turned into A basin skiing. But now I was just up at Steamboat for the holidays, and yeah, it was a little challenging on the snow. They did an amazing job with their man-made snow, but yeah, let it snow, let it snow, let it snow. All right, so it seems like just yesterday, I remember when you first started, I think we had an event up in, gosh, I don't know if it's Keystone or Copper, one of those places up there in your area. And, now you're going on 4 years in your role as the state broadband director for Colorado. So, obviously Colorado has very diverse topologies, from the Eastern Plains to the high country of the Rocky Mountains to the Western Slope. And that makes your job incredibly challenging to address nearly 100,000 Coloradians in rural and unserved areas. Can you speak a little bit about how you and your office kind of has been attacking this challenge, and how your efforts have changed, if they have, since the June 6th revised policy notice from the Department of Commerce?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something, if you're building infrastructure of any kind in Colorado, especially when you get outside the urban centers, it's really challenging west of Denver. And, when we look at, funding for broadband infrastructure, and this applies to BEAD and any of the federal and state programs, you kind of have to look at it like location by location, and really determine what type of technology mix is going to work well in these areas. And so, it could include a combination of fiber, cable, fixed wireless, LEO. It's definitely not a one size fits all topography in Colorado. And you have to be really mindful of that. And, in terms of, what makes sense from an investment perspective, working really closely with the communities and as well as the providers to really figure this out. It almost becomes an exercise of problem solving to the 10th degree, because in some cases there's a lot of rock, a lot of trees, rivers, railroads, and everything in between, and working with those jurisdictions and working with the partners on the ground to figure out, how you're going to connect locations is a really delicate dance for the broadband office. And we do a lot of that, and it really comes from really looking at it location by location, and making those making decisions that are you can justify financially, but actually end up really really serving the locations that you're trying to tackle. So that's kind of how we approach it, and we approach it, across the board that way. So the project areas in BEAD were helpful, but also in some cases they weren't, because within a project area, you could have really, really great variability just within a project area. So we looked at it location by location.
So, like, when you say location, like each BSL on its own?
Yes. Each broadband serviceable location. And when we first started down the path with BEAD under the old program, there was a requirement for the project, to develop these project areas. And what we found out is that it's not as simple as just drawing a line around a certain area and saying these are our unserved locations. We're gonna go do fiber. We're gonna build out fiber here. Like, we really had to analyze each one in its location to make sure that we could actually support an ISP in their application. This came up a couple of times with one of our providers, where they had a set of broadband serviceable locations that were easy to serve, but within a specific project area, there was BSLs on the other side, down a hill through a ravine, down at the valley floor, that if you were just looking at it on a map, you'd be like, oh, those locations are right next to those other locations. And really what it doesn't account for sometimes is what's in between. So you can cluster the locations, but you also have to really look at those kind of what I call outliers, and analyze those separately, to design the right type of technology solution.
So Colorado is a little bit different in that um, you see a lot of community broadband, up the corridor with, and I guess tell us a little bit. Is it SB 52 or whatever the state law that allows communities to be able to opt out and be able to bring in, like you've seen Loveland and Longmont and Fort Collins, and they've all created a community broadband. Can you talk a little bit about what's unique in Colorado and is it SB 52? I can't remember the name of the number.
Senate Bill 152, and I have a pretty funny story, yeah, around this one. When I was in community working in local government, I facilitated a couple of what we called the Senate 152 opt-out elections. So, in order for you to partner with industry or provide your own community network, you had to ask the electorate in your community if your community, the local government, could participate in broadband. And so I facilitated a couple of these elections, and it was pretty frustrating as a boots on the ground manager. You have a lot of competing priorities, and your community wants certain things, and your job is to remove barriers, right? And so this was always a barrier to success for communities. And so when I got this job, I made it my rallying cry to first order of business is to fix Senate Bill 152 so that we can permanently remove the barriers for community to partner with ISPs. So that first session, coming into the role, I proposed just revising the voter requirement out of that legislation, working with industry too. It wasn't a top-down approach. We really collaborated with them. And I think there was this fear that, local governments were going to, stand up community broadband networks across Colorado, and that just wasn't the case. And what we wanted to do was facilitate partnerships. And there's been, a couple of communities like Loveland and Longmont and was one of the first. Now, Glenwood was the very first community network in Colorado, the city of Glenwood, but Longmont was the first community that actually pitched it to the voters. And it was fought pretty fiercely, but at the end of the day, the city won, and they stood up their own community network. Those examples are few and far between. Most communities want to partner with industry, and I think Senate Bill 152 really slowed the progress of deployment in Colorado throughout the years. And I think if we hadn't had that legislation, we probably would have seen a lot more investment over the years. So it was really important to fix that. And we don't have that requirement anymore. Communities can partner with industry freely at their own will, without having to worry about asking the voters. And in every case that an election was run on just the Senate Bill 52 opt-out, all of the communities voted to allow their local jurisdiction to move forward with public-private partnerships for their own community broadband network. So it was very successful, and I think it really helped create more collaboration within the BEAD program as well, because a lot of those ISPs wouldn't be able to receive funding if it weren't for the Senate Bill 152 revision and legislation.
Yeah, no, it's. I'm glad to hear that. I haven't been keeping up with that, but it's certainly, I've never met a mayor that wanted to be in the broadband business, but they all want to be in the job creation, economic development business. So to do that, you have to get fiber in your community. And, so you have to, if the local providers, for whatever reason, can't do it, you have to kind of take matters into your own hands. So I'm glad that you got that sorted out. One of the questions that came in here from our audience is, with the administration changed last year, how did that affect your BEAD timelines for deployment?
I appreciate the question because, there was a significant change, obviously, in the revised policy notice last June. Where Colorado was at that time, we were done with the BEAD program when the revised policy notice came out, I believe, June 6th. And we had run 2 grant cycles in the original program, and we were just waiting on the NTIA to, come up with their guidance for how states can move forward. We were hoping at the time that, it wasn't a complete redo, but it was. And so, before the revised policy notice and after the revised policy notice, there's pretty significant changes. We went from roughly a 70% fiber to 30% fixed wireless mix in the original program to, and those are unofficial numbers because again, we could never really present anything to the NTIA at the time. And afterwards we saw, with the revised policy notice, we had to redo the BEAD program. and it was in 90 days, right? So, moving anything forward in 90 days with, and government's really challenging to do, but we were up for the task. We ended up having less fiber after in the benefit of bargain round because again, we prioritized low cost. And we saw a pretty big shift. Just under half of our locations would receive fiber and the remaining would receive, the lion's share would receive of locations, LEO. And so a fixed wireless, we don't have a huge presence of that in our BEAD program after the revised policy notice. And that's mainly because LEO came in at the lowest bid for those locations that fixed wireless was bidding on. So we saw a pretty big significant shift. And it did push out our deployment timelines for about 1.5 years because we would have been able to put shovels in the ground last year. But we're looking at doing it this year. Of course, we were approved. NIST recently approved our final proposal, so we're off to the races this year. But it did delay the implementation of BEAD for Colorado.
So obviously, with LEO, well, what percentage is Starlink versus Kuiper to you?
Yeah, so I'll just talk about numbers. So Amazon is about 47,000 of BSLs. Kuiper was 10,800 locations. And so in our total,
Starlink?
Yes, Starlink, SpaceX, they did a bid on our BEAD program, but they did not bid on as many locations as Amazon. Amazon's a new entrant. And
Okay.
And so we have about roughly, I don't know, Amazon probably has about 95% of the BSLs that they out of the total from LEO perspective. So 95% Amazon and then about 5% Starlink in terms of the LEO makeup, right, and share of those BSLs.
So Starlink's already, according to Brendan Carr, they're like 99.7% coverage of the country. So Kuiper for Amazon, well, I guess it's not Kuiper anymore, right? And then I forget they changed.
It's Amazon Leo.
Yeah. Amazon Leo, sorry. Amazon Leo, a creative name there. Amazon Leo is, where are they, when are they going to be able to offer service to those BSLs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, so Amazon Leo committed to turning people up or connecting people to service by the end of 2027. So that's about 2 years away. That was what, they put in their application and certified that they would do. But, in terms of a period of performance, they have up to 14 years to meet all their milestones. So they have a really aggressive timeline. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 14 years for LEO, which is, and 4 years for traditional providers. So fixed wireless and cable and fiber. So LEO has an even longer period of performance to deliver on their services.
I don't recall seeing that in Appendix A. Where did that 14 years come from?
Well, they have a 10-year performance period, and then they have and then there's an extended period of performance on top of that, which is an additional 4 years.
So, so basically, if they're not able to deliver that performance, you won't know for 14 years.
We'll know before 14 years because there's milestones. There's specific milestones that they have to meet. So we're not writing upfronting the costs of service. They have to meet specific milestones and subscriber numbers to receive funding from the state. So we have to verify that as well. So it's a little bit of an iterative process along the way. But we will know before 14 years if they can't meet some of those milestones.
Okay, so you're out in rural Colorado. You're relying on Amazon Leo. It's going to be a minimum 2 years before they can offer service. And then there's another 12 years for them to fully meet their performance milestones of 100 by 20. How are you going to measure their performance?
So the is an issue for us. So we're actively working on figuring out what type of compliance we're going to do. And I've talked to a couple of vendors that do this really well, where you can do remote sensory testing of Leo, a Leo service and Leo capacity. And so we'll have that ability by the time we enter into agreements and contracts and get Leo up and running in the BEAD program. And so those are also, performance milestones, performance requirements that they have to meet before they receive funding. And so, it's exciting because we're introducing new techniques into our broadband office to monitor the compliance and performance of Leo, which is different in some ways from traditional providers. So we will be working on those resources so that they're in place at the right time to really measure the success of the Leo program and the BEAD program.
So this makes sure I understand when you're doing any kind of Leo, they have to get subscribers before they can get paid. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's correct. Like there's yeah, exactly. So they have different percentages of subscribers and within the milestones that they have to meet. So if they don't meet those milestones, they don't receive the funding, right? And we're going to be tracking that, and we'll be working really closely with Starlink and Amazon to assess what's happening in real time with subscribers and the build out of their constellation networks to support the locations that they've applied for and the capacity that's associated with it. And so it's going to be an interesting experience for both Leo and the state, and figuring out how we get people the service that Leo has committed to. Those take rates are really critical, but for folks that are waiting for internet from the BEAD program, it's going to be a little while, especially for Leo.
Yeah, well, I guess the other kind of concerning part is you've considered all those locations, so 51% of your unserved locations as, quote, now being served with Leo. And so now you can't subsidize those areas with any other service until they default or they don't meet their performance. So you basically, this 51% of your unserved then is held hostage for 14 years until another service can come in if Leo is not able to take care of it to meet the minimum 100 by 20.
I mean, that is the risk associated with such a long period of performance. And it kind of, it kind of takes a page out of the RDOF program where, folks were defaulting several years after the program had given them an award and really locked a lot of those RDOF locations out of specific federal programs. And, according to the NTIA most recently, the feds don't plan on offering any more subsidies for BEAD funded networks. And so for those locations that have the potential for default, and to be honest, the potential for default is always the case in any sort of broadband grant program. But, the Leo networks, those locations we don't have the ability to go apply for federal funding, but we have a state grant program, and there's potential there to come in and help out if certain projects default. And I would anticipate that there will be overbuild of LEO locations by private investment over that period of performance, because it's a very long period of performance. And ISPs are always innovating quickly and figuring out how to deploy networks at a more cost-effective way, and just the innovations have moved quickly over the last couple of years. And I would guess that some of these locations will be picked up by other providers over the years, if there's an opportunity and it makes financial sense. So yes, you're right. It does lock folks. It does lock those locations out of federal funding. But there's an ability to still have to see investments of those locations, as the private sector evolves and continues to get more sharpen their pencils even better on how to deploy very expensive networks. So we'll probably see a lot of that over the years.
So how would that work though? If say that you have 51% of your unserved that are waiting on LEO, and if a state program allowed another provider to provide a more reliable service to come in, then do those BEAD locations get removed, or does LEO still get funding for locations that now are overbuilt with fiber or cable or something else?
You can always, invest in any location, whether there's a federal funding commitment or not. You know, it's not ideal, of course, right? Because it really, from a tracking perspective, it really kind of muddies the water. For the state of Colorado, in terms of us being able to tell, does this BSL already have funding? Is it served? Is it not? And we have these conversations a lot every time we run a grant cycle, and we always learn. We learn a lot more with each cycle, like in terms of, this location is served already by the private sector. Here's where our funding. This is where these locations have a subsidy, a federal subsidy or state. So ideally, we're not overbuilding, right? And especially from a resource perspective, it's a bit of a waste. But the state's going to keep track of them, just like we did with RDOF. We knew that those projects were defaulting, and we leveraged our state dollars to really help support those locations where the provider couldn't make it work in a federal program. So we'll do this. We'll take the same approach, but we don't want to go in and overbuild as a state those LEO locations, because we want LEO to be able to serve those locations if they can. So we're going to keep track of it. And if there are defaults, we'll go in and try to help subsidize those locations so they can get served.
So how does tribal, so obviously Colorado is a big tribal state. Where does tribal broadband fit into all this?
Oh, tribal broadband is so important for our state. We have worked really closely with the tribes over the last several years on broadband. They have been working on connectivity. They started under the ARPA dollars, and they received a lot of state and local fiscal recovery funding from our state legislature to build out broadband. We connected around just over 4,000 locations with fiber and mixed tech before the BEAD program. So our tribes were in really great shape before the BEAD program. And they did apply, mainly the Southern Ute Indian tribe. They received funding for 1,040 locations in our BEAD program, so not a ton. And thankfully, because they didn't need the BEAD program as much as maybe they would have if we hadn't started investing in the tribes during the pandemic. They are a gold standard for public-private partnerships and community broadband networks. I went down there last year for a ceremonial lighting up of the town, if you will, with their private sector partners and the tribal council members. And they were receiving 2 gig, 3 gig. And I mean, it was just incredible the speeds that the members down there are receiving for roughly $70. So when I look at the perfect scenario, the Southern Utes are just, they rise at the top of the list. And the Southern Ute Indian tribe, they're in the southwest part of the state. They're tucked far, far, far away from Denver. And they're just historically underinvested in many ways, including broadband. And the more we can do to make sure that they're connected, the more we can improve, well-being and health outcomes for the tribes. They also have a really great digital equity program housed within the tribal territory lands, where they do free devices. They do skilling up of their residents, leveraging Fort Lewis State College in Durango. So they've done such a great job of really taking these dollars, working with their community and private sector partners to build out the network. They truly are a shining star for us.
Well, Brandy, I wish I could talk to you all day. You always have great insights. I really appreciate everything that you've been doing for Colorado and continue to do to Colorado. And again, one of my favorite states to visit. So thank you so much. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We're going to get back together next week with researcher Elizabeth Parks of Parks and Associates to discuss consumer study, assistive technology for older adults. So just great ways that you can be able to leverage fiber and artificial intelligence to really be able to solve some big challenges that we have going forward as we get more of an aging population. So thanks again, Brandy, and we'll talk to you guys next week.